Welcome to another episode of the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame podcast. I'm your host, Chris May. Thanks to our partners at Metronet. Contact Metronet today and get 200 over 200 megabytes per second internet for $49.95. Add TV and phone for as low as $29.95 more per month and get 2 free set-top boxes. Visit metronetinc.com for all details. Metronet, simply a better connection. Gregg Popovich is well known as the 5-time NBA World Champion coach of the San Antonio Spurs, and he has more wins than any other coach in the history of the NBA. It's not quite as well known that Popovich is a Hoosier native, born in East Chicago and a graduate of Merrillville High School in 1966. In this episode, he'll share his basketball stories of growing up in the region, the aura of a legendary high school program and legendary high school coach in his area, and the Indiana college he nearly attended to play basketball before a last-minute change to attend the Air Force Academy. And you'll quickly get a sense for the drive, determination, and persistence that has led him to the greatest of basketball successes. With another sampling of life and lessons learned in Indiana basketball, here is the story of Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame inductee, Coach Gregg Popovich. So, Coach, this podcast series centers around folks who've grown up in Indiana, the influence basketball has had in their life. I'd like to know from the start with you what those first and early basketball memories are.
Well, as I think back, I think probably the first time I saw an outdoor hoop was on my way to school, walking to school to Franklin Middle School every day in East Chicago, Indiana. And I'd see that hoop and I'd get home and I'd go back and I'd be shooting on that hoop or dribble my basketball through downtown East Chicago to the Catherine House, they called it. And that's where we played some of our, I think it was biddy basketball or youth basketball, whatever it was. But I'd just dribble all day long during grade school to get to that place so I could shoot. So those two spots were where I first fell in love with the game.
And what was that experience like? I mean, was there a natural draw to basketball for you?
For me growing up, I ended up growing up in two different places. I was born in East Chicago and lived there until 6th grade. And my parents divorced and my mother remarried and we moved out to Merrillville. So growing up in East Chicago, that was the time of Coach John Barato. And everyone there, if you loved basketball, you wanted to be an East Chicago, Washington Senator. And that was the dream. I was so depressed when we moved because I know I'd be going to a different school. But that's the thrill that everybody had, wanting to play for John Barato at Washington.
And take me back, I believe it was 1960 when they won the state championship. I believe that would have been around your 6th grade year.
Yeah.
Do you remember following that team or what the atmosphere was like, what your interest was like?
Oh, sure. I had moved that year, 6th grade, to Merrillville, and I can still to this day, clear as a bell, remember sitting at my kitchen counter in Merrillville and listening to that game. And I still, I've corresponded a couple times with some of those guys, Phil Dawkins and Ron Divyak, Bobby Cantrell. Just listening to those guys over the radio was just so exciting. Percy Hunt and Ruben Rodriguez, who just wrote a book, by the way, about his experience in East Chicago. But that was the deal. That's what I wanted to do, and obviously ended up playing at Merrillville and moving on from there. But my real roots are in East Chicago.
To go back, you just listed a good number of names from that 1960 state championship team. But I've asked everyone in the series, when you were a kid, was there a certain player you wanted to be, you idolized, you tried to emulate?
I would say that at that point, it was those guys. It was basically Cantrell, Dawkins, and Divyak. Those were the guys, on that team that you saw play. And then when I moved out to Merrillville, then there were some guys at Merrillville that I watched, just like everybody else. When you're a 7th, 8th, 9th grader, you watch the guys on the varsity and they become your idols.
You mentioned the name of Hall of Famer John Barado. What was it about him? What, as a kid growing up wanting to play for him, what did you see in him or think of him?
He looked like a general. He looked tough and mean. He was probably none of those things. Since I never played for him, I don't know. But he was a tough guy. He had a little bit of a handicap, and he walked around. He looked real gruff. The guys were just so disciplined, and they played so hard. And he already by that time was so respected and loved in the town. Everybody knew his name. He was the man.
And taking us back to your childhood, would you go to a lot of high school games in the region? What was your experience like?
Uh, you were pretty much most interested, in your team. You had your schedule, your conference schedule, and back then, as you well know, the sectional tournaments and everything were pretty exciting. And at that point, the other great teams were really in Gary, uh, which is right next door to Merrillville. So uh, I always followed, Gary Frable, Gary Roosevelt. Those schools always had some great players. Some went on to play at UTEP, like Orson Artis there at Frable. And then, Dick Barnett was there at Gary Roosevelt. But yeah, Gary and East Chicago had great games. And even though I was at Merrillville for high school, I'd go downtown to Gary, to watch Frable and Roosevelt play.
And I can't help, as an outsider from the region, think about the Hammond Civic Center, some of the other gyms maybe in the area. Were there, tournaments, holiday tournaments, anything else that played into your childhood as far as the high school basketball element?
No, at that time, if I didn't go to Gary or drive to East Chicago to see a game, uh, it would just be the Christmas tournaments that you would go to, or section like Crown Point, for instance, or that's really the only other place that I would go would be to Crown Point.
As a kid, practicing, playing on the playground that you referenced, I mean, how would you describe yourself as a player? What did you work on, and what were your motivation?
Well, as you got older, that was the big deal. We all played outside at the playgrounds, till into dark for sure. And in our area where I was, there were two places. There was a place called, it was at 39th and Broadway in Gary, and then Griffith Park. And that's where people seem to congregate. So, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior years, you couldn't wait until, 4 o'clock in the afternoon or so. And you'd go to one of those courts and, as we've all done, play and hope you keep winning so you're not sitting forever to get back into a game. And that's where I ran into a couple other idols, like you speak about, being a young kid and looking up. Uh, when I'd go to Griffith Park, there were these two guys, Ron Serban and Paul Ozug, and they played. Can't remember which high school teams they were on, but like you said, it could have been a Hammond team. But when those guys, they ran the courts, and if they picked you on your team, you were really excited to play, and you'd be the young guy in the court. And then by the time you're a senior or whatever, you're running the courts, and it was just a way of life to play outside and play on those playgrounds in Indiana for sure.
And for so many guys on the playground scene, it was a sun up to sundown, an all day type of experience. Is that what you guys had going there?
Yeah, one year I convinced my parents I should not get a job in the summer because I needed to play. I needed to work on my game, and they actually fell for it. so so I got a free summer. I didn't have to mix cement and put up bricks for a couple of the high school teachers who built homes in the summertime, and I got out of it. So I'd go there all day long, put on my ankle weights, and go up and down the court and play, and wait until everybody else got off work and hit the courts. So it was a great summer.
So, in hearing you tell these stories, mention some of these names, a love of basketball comes through quite clearly, even at that young age. Was there a point where basketball became everything to you, and this was just a love affair?
Well, that's for sure. I mean, if I wasn't studying, I was playing ball. I was just totally fixated on getting to those outdoor courts and becoming a better player. Like I said, that summer, all day long, I just do dribbling drills and run up and down, and uh, hope that the ankle weights would make me jump better, and just shoot until your arms wanted to fall off, and take a break, grab something to eat that you brought with you, and then start playing again. So it was all consuming. It was almost like a romance, because of the sectionals and the regionals and the semifinals and semi-state and all the things that you think about. And we never really had a good team at Merrillville, but you'd still follow everybody, from Gary, Chicago, and Lafayette and Muncie, and on the way down to Butler Fieldhouse. It was like a mecca, actually, for all of us growing up, no matter where you were in Indiana.
And for so many of us who have grown up in Indiana, it is a love affair, it is a passion. But it sure sounds like in your case, it was even more amplified. I mean, was there a motivation other than just a romance? Was it aspiring to play for the varsity team, aspiring to get a college scholarship? What drove you?
Yeah, I just think that I was really almost as, I don't know how angry you could be as a young kid, but I was mad at my mom and my stepdad for moving us out of East Chicago, because it was like somebody just stole your dream, and I think it just made me work even harder, and to want to be a good player. And I think the other factor for me personally was I got cut freshman and sophomore years. I didn't make the team those 2 years. I was really a late bloomer. I ended up being the leading scorer as a senior, but those 2 years, I just stayed in the gym. We had a gym where there was upstairs, and there were these two baskets hooked up against cement wall and cement floor. And while the freshman team and the sophomore JV team was practicing, I was upstairs in the balcony playing the whole time, and then made the team finally my junior year. So I think getting cut was a heck of a motivation for me.
And in those experiences, when the other teams are practicing, are you by yourself? I mean, what were
I was
your?
by myself. I was all by myself up there, dribbling, shooting, running around. And I don't know what it was. I don't know if I was just a wise ass and wanted to just let the coach know that I was working hard up there, or it was the only place really that I could play at that time, because I didn't have a car yet. So you didn't go someplace else to play. So that was the choice.
And I've also read a couple of accounts that one of the assistant coaches, I think it was Coach Vermillion, said that you would want to work out, but not with a basketball, doing defensive slide drills, all kinds of things. So it just seemed like you just flat out want to get better overall.
Yeah, I'd watch what they were doing downstairs, and I'd try to be I'd imitate them. But Coach Vermillion, he was at that time he was a baseball coach, and my chemistry and physics teacher later on. But he was great to me. He'd always come up there and say hello, and what are you doing? And I'd say, well, I'm just trying to do what they're doing down there, and I'm going to keep working at it. And he's been a great friend. He and another teacher named Mr. Hutchinson, he was math teacher, and they were just unbelievably motivating factors. And to this day, when we go play the Bulls, most of the time they come up, we'll get them tickets, and they come up and watch the game. And then, as you know, Coach Vermillion ended up coaching the basketball team for a period.
Hardworking is going to be the obvious answer. You may not brag on yourself, but how would you describe yourself as a player in high school? What did you excel at?
Well, I think I was kind of like a utility infielder in baseball, I think. Because I I wasn't Ron Bonham as a shooter or anything, and I was a 6 foot 2.5 inch center, because our center got booted off the team for disciplinary reasons. And so the coach came at that time, Bill Metcalf. He said, "You're now the center on the basketball team," when I was a senior. uh, but on the playgrounds and everything, I was basically a guard, and I was handling the ball and doing all that sort of thing. But I I was nothing amazing. I scored about 16 and a half points that senior season, and I used to get the newspaper and I'd look at the leading scorers whenever the paper would come out. Uh, and I think the leading scorer that year, 66, in our area, was a guy named Bruce Lindner. I think he played at Velpo. He was, 25 or 30 or whatever he was. They listed like about 20 people, and I was the last one on the list at 16.5. So I'd get a kick out of seeing that all the time.
You made the list.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe it was.
times have changed. Nowadays, in the high school scene, kids switch schools and go from here to there. But I'm just curious, with that dream of being an East Chicago, Washington senator, of wanting to play for Johnny Brado, was there any glimmer of hope in the back of your mind that maybe by the time I get to high school, I can get back to East Chicago, or maybe I could transfer there? Does that even enter your mind in your high school experience?
Actually, it did at one point. It got squashed pretty quickly. But the only reason I thought that is because both my parents worked at Inland Steel, which is where a lot of people in the harbor in East Chicago worked. And so I thought, well, maybe they'll move back. But that never happened. So I ended up, trying to go to their games. And at the time they had the Trifunovic brothers, and one of their best players was Mirko Blesic, who played there and graduated same year as me, '66. So I'd watch those guys play, and they had a hell of a team then too. But it was just tradition there with Coach Barado for sure.
And then to your experiences at Merrillville, you mentioned the frustrations getting cut the first 2 years. In your junior year, I believe your team lost to East Chicago, Washington in the sectional, according to my research.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, was there anything interesting to that matchup or that game?
Well, not not in the sense of being competitive. I mean, they were so much better than we were. Maryville at that time it was all football. That was like a football school, and there weren't too many people interested. Like when I'd head over to Griffith or to 39th and Broadway, most of the time I was by myself. And finally, by senior year, I convinced a couple other guys, that they need to come. But they they well, back to your question. Watching those guys play in East Chicago was probably the thrill for me, and knowing that we weren't going to move back there at all, that was really all that I could do.
And then your senior year, I believe you made it to the sectional championship and got beat by Crown Point. What was the sectional atmosphere in your experiences?
I think I looked forward to it more than Christmas, to be honest with you. It was better than graduation. It was better than the end of the year, and you have the whole summer ahead of you. But just looking forward to that was amazing. When we lost East Chicago, that was no surprise to anybody. But I think it was actually at East Chicago. Uh, well, it wouldn't be at Merrillville. It would probably be there. They probably hosted it, and I think they sat like 5,000 people there, and I was just in awe. I was just thrilled to be there and to be able to play against Mirko Blesic and the guys that they had that year. It was a thrill. And then my senior year was a very disappointing. We had a decent team, and we thought we could win the sectional, but I sprained my ankle right toward the end of the season, and I couldn't even walk on it. I can still remember being injected with cortisone, taking these cortisone shots, and I certainly couldn't feel my ankle. and I and I tried. I went out there, and it was just like awful. You couldn't, I couldn't really move or do anything. So we didn't fare very well, to say the least.
And in your era, of course, East Chicago, Washington was a powerhouse program. 4 and 5 years after you graduate, which you're gone and out of the area, but you had the back-to-back. East Chicago Roosevelt wins it in '70, wins the state championship, and Washington wins another one in '71. I mean, was there any
Right.
sense of this group is coming, or was the region just so cutthroat that there was a lot of talent? I mean, were people looking forward to that, or what was the talent level in that era? I guess I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, all those guys, that played in '70, '71. A lot of those guys ended up, you know, all the similar courts, and it probably changed, to some degree, but all those guys were, I mean, sixth, seventh graders, when East Chicago, Washington uh, became, just year in and year out, it was a great program. And then East Chicago Roosevelt caught up. Uh, and then, you had all these, it just kept going, all the way to Pete Turgovich. It was just like a petri dish. Everybody wanted to play. And that's, there were other teams in Gary Tolliston, that also produced some good players. So the competitiveness was really something else.
And I guess I should have mentioned Tolston was a state runner-up in '69, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
Roosevelt won it in '70 with Jim Bradley and crew, and then in '71, of course, Turgevich, Stoddard, and Bridgman, that crew with East Chicago, Washington, that win a state championship.
Stoddard, it was interesting. Stoddard, we were together in East Chicago through fifth grade. And that's when I left. We lived right across the street from each other, and I'd play with his older brother.
Really?
Tim was the pitcher, right?
Yes. Yep. You're right.
Yeah, Jeff Stoddard was his brother and my age, and I think Tim was the younger one. And we lived together in this place called Sunnyside, and a lot of people there worked in the mill and inland, and then lived in Sunnyside on Butternut Street, and they lived right across. And I always got a kick out of it later in life, and all of a sudden I'd hear about this Tim Stoddard guy, and I'd say, "My gosh, I lived right across from him." So
don't you think maybe he's saying that he grew up right across the street from you, though, too?
I don't know.
I'm interested, having described your high school experience, what did you think the next step was going to be for you as far as college and therefore basketball?
I was all set. I was going to Wabash College.
Really?
Yeah, I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to go into medicine. I went down and visited. I had a cousin who was an FBI guy, and he had graduated from Wabash, and he had me come down and visit, and I did. And I played with the team, and he even took me to I can't remember what fraternity, because he wanted me to go to this fraternity or whatever. And I talked to the coach, played with the guys. He wanted me to come. And I was going. I was all set. And then all of a sudden, I end up at the Air Force Academy.
Which is not too close to Crawfordsville or Wabash College.
No. And I didn't know a damn thing about it. I have no military background in my family. And it just so happened that there was a guy 1 year older than me, Mike Kelly, who actually got recruited by Air Force Academy, then coached by Bob Spear. And he went to the prep school at the academy because he couldn't quite get in. And then my senior year, he's at the prep school, and two of my classmates, one got recruited for football at West Point, and the other one football at the Air Force Academy. And they started talking to me. And before I knew it, I did all the congressman thing, writing the letters and everything you have to do, and got an appointment to the Air Force Academy. And in all honesty, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't really know much about it, but everybody, all my teachers at school, the principal, Vermillion and Hutchison, everybody said, "This is the greatest thing. This is an amazing education, and you should go there," and all that kind of stuff. And so I just said, "Okay, I guess I'll go." Those three guys, I know them, and they're all going, so I'll do it. And I didn't go to Wabash. I ended up at the academy, and same thing. Didn't make the varsity until I was a junior. So
I think there's a lesson in persistence to be picked up on here throughout your career.
Yeah, I guess so.
Obviously, your accomplishments are far and wide and well known. But what led you to a career in coaching?
Oh, wow. Well, I loved the game, and at the academy, I always took pride in the fact that at that point, I was the only non-recruited player that had ever played there, and ended up being the captain and the leading scorer. And that took some, like you said, some persistence to get to that point. And so that was 1970, and then all of a sudden, in my head, when I graduated, obviously, but all I could think about was 1972 was the Olympics, and I just thought, is there any way that maybe I could, figure out some way to try out for the Olympic team? How do you do that? So, the dream continued. So, it was the Olympic dream, and it didn't work out. I didn't make it. I got to try out for it, but I didn't make it. And then Coach Hank Egan, took over at the academy for Bob Spear and asked me to come back as an assistant coach. So I was still in the military, but got assigned to the academy as an assistant coach in '73. And that's when I decided I wanted to coach, because Hank Egan was such a great teacher. Whether it was game coaching or how to put a practice together and how to motivate, he was very special, and I got to be with him during a period of time. So that's where I really decided that I wanted to coach.
So did you ever flirt with the idea of trying to play professionally and make a bit of a living there?
Yeah, I did, but Larry Brown squashed that pretty quickly.
Well, that must be an interesting story.
Well, I had to do a 5-year commitment. So my commitment wasn't up until into like 1976. And at that point, Coach Brown invited me to try out for the Nuggets. they were in the ABA then. So I did. I went up and I give it a shot, and I did the same thing. I worked all summer, and I had the gym there at the academy and drove people crazy, just doing whatever I could to stay in shape and play and get ready for those tryouts. And I did. And I don't know why. I don't know what they were thinking, but Larry kept David Thompson instead of me. I could never figure that one out.
Did you ever forgive him for that?
Well, he ended up giving me my first NBA job, so he made up for it.
There's a good makeup, absolutely.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you, because you've experienced things all over the world in basketball. Obviously as Hoosiers, we pat ourselves on the back. We've got this reputation.
Sure.
With a worldly view now, how do you place the Indiana basketball experience, the Indiana basketball culture, whatever you want to phrase that as?
Well, I can't imagine. We've all got the quote unquote city game. In New York and L.A. and that sort of thing, in Chicago, and we all know about that. But as far as an entire state is concerned, I don't think there's any place that has both the history and the hysteria that gets produced for so many people in so many spots, so many backgrounds, from the country to the city. It's a wide swath. There's no place where basketball isn't loved the way we've all loved it.
And at the same time, you're a guy who's been away from our state for so long, but you have not forgotten your roots. I know you stay in touch with friends that you went to school with. I know
Sure.
you've been supportive of different causes and basketball related things. What brings that about?
Well, I think any of us that have had any success realize that it didn't just happen, that you learned what it takes, both understanding that it's not just about you and you didn't do anything just by yourself, that you've had help along the way, you've had mentors, you've had people that you looked up to, whether they were other players or coaches or teachers, and that that all started in Indiana when you were a little kid. And life becomes complicated in a lot of ways for all of us, but down deep, that little kid and your first loves like that never leave you.
And I know you've been asked multiple times, but to boil down what the Spurs have accomplished in your tenure with the franchise, to what do you accredit that, and how do you tell that story?
I say two words: Tim Duncan. Timmy paid for my house, the suits I have to wear at the games, and everything else. My kids' educations. he, like I said, we don't do these things on our own, and there are a lot of great coaches out there. But if you're fortunate enough to get somebody in your program like that, that's not just a great player, but a great leader and a true franchise player. Everybody talks about franchise players. There aren't really that many when you start counting them. But I was blessed with him, and he made everybody else around him better. So I think as an individual, I'm persistent. I worked hard, but the so-called success I've had is because of people like Tim Duncan, and I could name a whole lot more. And I'm not gonna, because then you get into trouble. But he's the obvious building block around which everything else happened.
And as we record this in late June of 2020, the quarantine, the COVID-19 situation, any insight you can give us into the NBA and getting bound to Orlando, or what might end up happening with the remainder of this season?
Well, I think that's all up in the air. I mean, as we speak at this point, everything is on track to start up in early June. Everybody getting to Orlando and starting to go to work, and then finish up this season that we just interrupted. So it's a situation where people are they're nervous to some degree, but Adam Silver and his staff have done everything they can to try to ensure that this can be just as safe as if you were sitting back home on your couch getting ready to figure out what you're going to do for dinner. You're going to cook at home, or you're going to go get to go somewhere, or you're going to go take a chance and sit at a restaurant. Well, we're not going to do that. we're not going to restaurants or anything. We're going to be pretty like they talk about the bubble, I guess is what they say in the papers and everything. But we're going to go do this thing unless things drastically change in the next couple of weeks. But we'll see how that goes.
So has the downtime allowed you an opportunity to find any new wines you like, or enjoy the ones you already had?
Well, my main concern was to not drink too much wine. When you're practicing and playing games and all that sort of thing, you don't sit down at a table and drink wine quite as much. But every day now at 5 o'clock, there's nothing going on. So you have to think about whether you're really going to open a bottle or not. But I've taken the time to, you can, as you probably do the same thing, you can read things you've been waiting to do and that you haven't read in a long time or never got to. And there's a million things in your house, whether it's fixing things or filing things. But I think mostly really taking time to remember people, write letters, make calls that maybe you haven't done for a while. You've got the time to do that now with people. And I think that's been really rewarding for me to catch up with a good number of people that, we lose track of because of our busy lives.
Well, Coach, we're very appreciative of your time for this podcast. We're appreciative of the support of the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame. And congratulations on all you've done, and thanks for your support.
Well, I'm honored to do anything for you guys. You do a great job there keeping everything together. I can't imagine how you do it. And I really enjoy getting the magazines and reading, just reading stories about schools that I'd never even heard of. And some coach that was there for 37 years at such and such a town. And you start reading, and all of a sudden you're enveloped in romance again when you realize that this has happened over and over and over again in all these places for all these kids and all these coaches. It's quite a story.
Well, thanks for your time, Coach. We greatly appreciate it.
You take care, Chris.
If you haven't yet, here's a reminder to subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review and rating. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and other podcast outlets. Share these episodes on your social media page with friends and family and tell them more about our podcast. Also, be sure to follow the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. HoopsHall.com is the official website for the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame and has information on our inductees, our museum, our events, and an online gift shop. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame podcast, and we invite you to continue to listen for future episodes as we share the stories of basketball in Indiana.